Let's talk about Severance, because between
"Who are you?"
and "Hi there,"
"You on the table?"
the world completely shifts for two different people. The character that's on the screen, and for us, the viewer. Who she is becomes way less important because she became the person or the you that's on the table. Meanwhile, the camera goes from above the room, looking straight down, to inside the room. We start with an objective, godlike understanding of the space, like one that would be provided in an architectural plan. And then we lose it. We're stuck in the same exact place with the same constrained perspective, on the same table even as the one who's confused and the one who's trapped. These shifts, they're hugely important to the storytelling in Severance, but more importantly, they're fundamental to understanding the trade-offs that we make every day when we pass through spaces in our real world and our everyday lives, and when we go to spaces designed for work. Because while Severance is a dystopic exaggeration of those things, the majority of the buildings in the show, they're real. And their intention and their design is to make us feel less human and easier to control. This is how the spaces of Severance and corporate architecture work. Severance, that's the medical procedure that renders memory spatially determined. And that splits your identity into an innie, work self, and an outie, home self. At that point, the role of the workplace is actually to ensure that those two versions, that they never meet. While the procedure is a fictional conceit of the show, the architectural traps, they're not. For instance, the opening scene is set on what they call the awakening platform, where an innie gains consciousness for the first time. They're really impressionable at this point, so the room is like this blank slate. You might think that a featureless, sterile room like this, that it's neutral, or that it works the same way for everybody. After all, its strangeness comes from lacking any unique qualities or anything like personal touches. It seems that just natural that everyone would feel self-conscious or alienated in a space like this. But that's not quite true. This room, regardless of what we call it in the show, it's just a boardroom. And some people, they spend a lot of time becoming accustomed and immune to the awkwardness that's inherent to rooms like this. It's only newcomers that are susceptible to its powers, and it makes them feel uncomfortable and intimidated. It's not just job titles that create hierarchy in a place like this. The room itself helps widen that gap, and it grants certain individuals advantage and power over other individuals. The table does that too. It's so massive and imposing inside of the space because it takes up so much room inside of it. Besides looking like a coffin in that first scene, later in it, it becomes a huge obstacle. The new innie wants out of the room.
Let me out of here.
And so she does a complete lap around the table, searching for an exit. After breaking down on the floor, the table covers her entire body, and it leaves only her head peeking up over top of it. The table, and thus the corporation, have the power to set the stage and to be able to control all of the interactions in a space like this. This one is a boat or a barrel-shaped table, which promotes group cohesion, and sometimes it encourages teamwork. And it does that by bowing out on the long sides of the table. This way, meeting attendees don't have to crane their neck forward to be able to see one another. But it also creates heads at each end of the table. These two positions, they naturally gain a position of authority over the rest of the group by making their position more visibly prominent than any of the other ones. One of these gets a door immediately behind it, and that way the most important employee can make a spectacular entrance whenever they want. That's the body of the disembodied voice we were just listening to. Roll title sequence. Cut to him in his car crying. That's his world shift. We left him at the peak of his power. Now he's pathetic and small. The solitary figure is inexplicably drawn toward the mirrored box like a zombie. And that's Lumen Industries, a fictional corporation. But the building and the parking lots, those are very real. Throughout the middle of the 20th century, AT&T's research division, Bell Labs, they were losing scientists and engineers. They were just fed up with living near and working in their Manhattan headquarters. So in 1959, they hired the architect Eero Saarinen to be able to reimagine their downtown labs for the middle of New Jersey. Saarinen was also doing the same thing for other companies like IBM and John Deere in that very same year. And he had some really clever observations about what happens when companies take their headquarters from a downtown location and move it out into the suburbs, or how they go from a tall tower to a flat office park. In downtown, towers are surrounded by other towers. corporations are sitting next to other corporations. One can stand out from the pack in this kind of situation by being either taller or unique in some other way. The vertical arrangement of a building like this relies on the elevator for mobility. It's also a direct manifestation of the corporate ladder or the corporate pyramid. The most exclusive spaces, those are reserved for the top, and that's where the best views are out of. An elevator ride becomes a kind of hopeful endeavor as it passes floors incrementally, each one more managerial than the previous one. But here in New Jersey, no one even has a corner office. No one even has a window in their office.
Based on his research, Saarinen decided that the offices and laboratories would use interior building space and be windowless.
I actually found some testimonials by an original employee that worked here, and he said that the employees would actually paint fake windows inside of their offices to be able to maintain some sense of connection and a semblance of reality and connection with the outside world. That's pretty bleak. Instead of executives getting their own corner office, the best perk here is a parking space in the special front lot. Clearly, this parking space, not that close. Then there's the elevator. In New Jersey, it takes a completely new role. Even those original employees would play pranks on one another by calling the elevator phone, trying to keep riders past their intended stops. Those wacky scientists. But when everything is spread horizontally like it is here at this office park, going up or down in an elevator, it's more like slipping between parallel realities than it is a hopeful journey of incrementally going up. In Severance, it's a highly guarded gateway between innies and outies with only 2 stops. Before entering, he changes his shoes like Mr. Rogers, trades his ID, and then he steps in. Remember back at the boardroom? That's when he said,
"I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself."
Well, we meet him again downstairs, and the camera is ahead of him. We are ahead of him, and he's confidently navigating inside of the hallway. This isn't Bell Labs anymore, but the employees used to joke about their hallways too. They'd pass the time by seeing who could roll coins the furthest down their insanely long corridor. Here back at Lumen, looking backwards while moving forward, we're unable to see where we're going, only where we've been. To us, the hallway seems impossible to navigate. It has no distinguishing characteristics whatsoever, just whiteness and a series of 90-degree turns that don't really seem to add up to anything or have any logic that we're able to discern. Yet he knows exactly where he's going, and he goes and he finds his desk. It's a single workstation inside of a cluster of 4, which would become sort of like an icon for the show. But there's a few things that are strange about this one. First, it's comically small. Why would 4 people be huddled so close together in such a vast space? That means anyone that's walking in will be able to survey and understand the room before any of the 4 that are working here will ever notice. The carpet helps in that too. It softens people's footsteps so that you can't tell when they've entered. Meanwhile, all 4 employees, they have their backs exposed the entire time. Then there's that strange arrangement between the 4 desks. This radial orientation turns each workstation so that it faces obliquely into the side of the other. So in this entire setup, the full group of 4, they're vulnerable to any outsiders. Meanwhile, each member of the group is vulnerable to one another, bound together but kept separate. This is the space of control. You might have heard of panopticons, the prison design that can keep hundreds of prisoners under control with just a few guards. Don't let them unite, and don't let them see that you're watching. This condition, it's the opposite of the boardroom, where a giant piece of furniture makes everyone point toward the center of the room. Here, we have a tiny piece of furniture, and everyone's facing outward, but in unique directions. I might call this the difference between centripetal and centrifugal spaces. It's made even more appropriate because each area has its own kind of spinning. One because of the woman spinning around the room, and then the other because the desks are facing and rotating different directions. Of course, another strange thing about this cluster of desks is that each one is offset from the center just a little bit, and this creates what's called a pinwheel plan. You know what architect famously loved pinwheel plans? Frank Lloyd Wright. You know why he liked them? Because it allowed him to connect rooms without the need for hallways. Guess the next building that we see, Usonian Site 53. This is the opposite of the office building by just being quintessentially Wrightian. It avoids hallways, spaces are compressed, and they're made of wood instead of whiteness. And finally, the furniture here promises a choice instead of control.
But if you provide said child with all of its beds upon birth, you allow it to progress across the room at its own rate.
Except our hero, he doesn't really have a choice. His circumstances led him to sleeping in a bed that was made for children and sculpted to look like a race car. Okay, so here's my theory. Back at the boardroom, this is how we started, laying down on a table. How did she get like this? The composition makes it seem like that she fell. And Dan Erickson, the show's writer, actually explained that the original idea did actually show the person being lowered down from above. The composition reinforces this reading by surrounding her with a series of nested rings that radiate outwards, like ripples in water from a dropped stone. Each ring is a step between the specific and the generic, from fully 3D and colorful and alive human being to a 2D, gray and lifeless space off to the outside. When feeling disoriented on the awakening platform, innies are promised the possibility of feeling
right as rain.
Right is another word for 90 degrees or upright. Innies begin with the horizontal, and relief comes in the form of feeling vertical. I think that this is a lot like the story of Flatland. In Flatland, there are a whole bunch of shapes, and these people, they don't know that they're shapes because they only see one another from the side. From here, all the shapes, they just look like a line. Those that are trapped in Flatland, they're not even aware of the concept of a third dimension or that some could have a shape beyond a line. That's not until a 3D sphere lifts the flat square upward into the third dimension that it is able to understand all the dimensionality of their world. It's only from above, looking down on Flatland, that you can make out everyone's unique shape. And that's exactly what happens throughout Severance. So we fell in at the beginning. Back at the Frank Lloyd Wright house, we got a hint of the opposite. He tries to lay down, but the race car bed is too uncomfortable. He's motivated upright only to see a figure standing in the woods. And that person looking at him seemed to recognize him. Then,
oh, did the prowler invading my home make you feel seen?
So seen.
He felt seen. He lay down on a 3D colorful bed and awoke feeling seen. This analysis, it doesn't even get us past the first episode. I haven't even brought up how the map looks exactly like a Frank Lloyd Wright design, or how Rene Magritte references are strewn everywhere, from the opening scene to the shadow that looks like the bowler hat paintings, to them raining, to the defiant shadow, to the inability to distinguish representation from reality, which is exactly how the show uses all kinds of art and dioramas and shrines to build and reinforce the lore of Lumen. Or how in the final scene of the first season takes place in a room surrounded on all sides by black and white flat 2D representations of innies. Even in the second season, while the building is talking, it says,
"You probably don't recognize me from this angle."
Obviously, I think about this too much, but all of these are how real-life artists and architects have attempted to make sense of spaces that are like the ones in Severance. Bell Labs embraced the more controlling possibilities of what architecture could take on in order to coax employees into becoming the most productive engineers and scientists that they could ever be. But that comes with trade-offs, you know? It sucks you in like a zombie. It's centrifugal. Frank Lloyd Wright, on the other hand, it pushes you outward. It nudges you out into the landscape. It's centripetal, connecting you with others and with yourself. It's the difference between being watched and being seen. And there really is something to this architectural story and this illusion of choice that goes along with it. Architecture manipulates our sense of freedom, and it shapes how we move and interact in the world. But that influence, it's not limited to foreboding office buildings or just high-tech labs. It's everywhere. Take strip malls, for instance. They might look like ordinary stretches of concrete and parking lots, but they're deliberately designed to guide our choices in ways that you probably never notice. And I've been digging into how these mundane-looking structures might be far more influential and even more valuable than we typically give them credit for. And if you're curious, I have a brand new video on Nebula that explores the hidden value of strip mall. And if you usually only catch me here on YouTube, you're missing out on a ton of exclusive content, like the building tours that I do, or the behind-the-scenes look at my new studio here that I only post on Nebula. But that's not just my videos. Nebula is powered by over 200 creators, including Hoog, City Nerd, and Real Engineering, making it one of the most innovative streaming platforms that are out there. By pooling our resources, we can push each other to create even better, more ambitious projects. Some of the best content on Nebula comes from our originals productions, where bigger budgets let us experiment with brand new ideas. May I suggest that you check out Neo's Underexposure? I really think that it's some of the most compelling documentary storytelling that's out in the space right now. To join, Nebula offers flexible subscription plans. You could do it monthly or annual, and even, yes, the lifetime option. That means you pay once and have access to everything that Nebula ever creates forever. So start by catching that fascinating look into strip malls by clicking the link on the screen or in the description, or just scan the QR code. With my link, you can subscribe to Nebula for 40% off. So that means it only costs $3 a month when you sign up for a year. And with that, you'll never miss one of my videos again, and you'll be right at the heart of a media movement that's changing how creators and audiences connect. Check it out. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and see you over on Nebula.